For 18 years, the great Queen Nefertari has carried the weight of a loss she never managed to heal from, convinced her daughter was stillborn. But everything changes on a night marked by the gods, when, within the golden walls of her palace and under the flickering torchlight, her eyes land on the unthinkable. A young servant, practically invisible to the nobility, wears around her neck an ancient pectoral that only one person in the world could possess. With her heart pounding like a war drum, and her reason reeling in the face of the impossible, Nefertari begins a desperate search for the truth. But uncovering a secret sealed by time and the temples could unleash forces powerful enough to shatter the kingdom's foundations and rewrite her legacy forever. The golden light of dawn crept slowly across the polished limestone floor of the royal chamber, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the air like tiny stars. Queen Nefertari stood motionless at her balcony, her slender fingers gripping the sun-warmed stone as she gazed out over the awakening city. 18 years. 18 long, hollow years since that terrible night when her world had shattered into countless pieces, never to be whole again. Your Majesty, the soft voice of her handmaiden Sati barely penetrated the fog of memory that had enveloped the queen. The morning rituals await. Nefertari closed her eyes briefly, drawing in a deep breath that filled her lungs with the scent of lotus blossoms and myrrh. When she turned, her face was a perfect mask, serene, regal, and utterly impenetrable. "Of course," she replied, her voice as smooth and cool as the alabaster jars that lined her dressing table. "Prepare the coal and the ceremonial headdress. The temple awaits." As Sati busied herself with the elaborate preparations, Nefertari's gaze drifted to the small golden shrine in the corner of her chamber. Inside, illuminated by a single flickering flame, sat a tiny pair of sandals that had never been worn. Beside them, a miniature sistrum inlaid with lapis lazuli, its delicate handle carved with hieroglyphs spelling out a name, Meritaten, beloved of Aten, a daughter who had taken her first breath in this very chamber, and then, before the sun had risen twice, had vanished like morning mist on the Nile. "The high priests have been inquiring, Your Majesty," Sati ventured cautiously as she draped the heavy beaded collar around Nefertari's neck. "They wonder if you will be participating fully in tonight's ceremony for Ra. It is significant that you should be present." Nefertari suppressed a sigh. The priests, always watching, always whispering, as if their gods had appointed them as her personal guardians or jailers. "Tell them their queen understands her duties well enough without their reminders," she replied, with just enough edge in her voice to discourage further conversation on the matter. As the morning progressed, Nefertari moved through the palace like a ghost, present, yet somehow not quite there. Servants and courtiers bowed deeply as she passed, their eyes downcast in deference, though she detected the flickers of curiosity and pity that followed in her wake. The great queen, marked by loss, carrying her grief like an invisible crown. "The trade delegation from Punt awaits your pleasure, Your Majesty," announced Amenhotep, her chief steward, as she entered the audience chamber. The elderly man had served her since before her marriage to Pharaoh Ramesses, and was one of the few who remembered her as she once was, laughing, impetuous, filled with life. "Very well," she said, settling onto her throne. "Let us hear what treasures they bring from across the great waters." For the next several hours, Nefertari listened to proposals, settled disputes among nobles, reviewed the temple accounts, and approved plans for the upcoming festival of Osiris. Her mind was clear, her judgment swift and fair. None who observed her would have guessed that beneath her composed exterior, a storm raged. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Nefertari retreated to her private garden, a lush oasis of palm trees, flowering shrubs, and a small pond filled with brightly colored fish. Here, at least, she could remove the weight of her royal persona for a few precious moments. "You've been avoiding me, sister." The deep voice came from the shadows of a sycamore tree, and Nefertari did not need to turn to recognize its owner. "I've been ruling a kingdom, Knumet," she replied, as her younger half-brother stepped into view. "Some of us have responsibilities beyond sampling every wine jar in the royal cellars." Knumet laughed, a sound as dry as the desert beyond the city walls. "Always so dutiful, and yet I wonder, does all this duty bring you any peace?" Nefertari's shoulders stiffened. "Peace is a luxury reserved for the dead. That's not what you used to say." Knumet moved closer, his jeweled sandals crunching softly on the gravel path. "There was a time when you spoke of building a kingdom where the gods smiled on every hearth, where no mother would ever have to—" "Enough." The word cut through the air like a knife. "I did not come here for your philosophies, nor your pity." Knumet's expression softened. "It's not pity, Nefertari. It's concern. For 18 years you've lived like a shadow of yourself. The palace whispers that the gods took your daughter as punishment for some perceived arrogance. The temple murmurs that you've turned away from their comfort. And he hesitated. "I see my sister turning herself to stone day by day." Nefertari turned away, her fingers absently stroking the petals of a blue lotus flower that floated in the pond. "She would be a woman now," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Perhaps married, perhaps with children of her own." "Nefertari, they never found a body." Her voice had dropped to a whisper. "All these years and no trace. Not a scrap of linen, not a single bead from her birth bracelet. It's as if she simply vanished into the air." "The investigations were thorough," Knumet reminded her gently. "Every house was searched, every boat on the Nile inspected. Ramesses himself led the hunt for 3 months. There was talk of conspiracy, of enemies within and without the kingdom, and yet nothing was ever proven," Nefertari replied. "No culprit identified, no motive discovered, just emptiness." A silence fell between them, broken only by the soft splash of fish in the pond and the distant calls of birds preparing to roost for the night. "The ceremony tonight," Knumet finally said. "Will you go through with it?" Nefertari's laugh was hollow. "What choice do I have? The great queen must show her devotion to Ra lest the sun refuse to rise tomorrow." "That's not what I meant," Knumet persisted. "The high priestess Mainet has been pushing for this particular ceremony for months. There's talk that she means to help you find closure." "Closure?" Nefertari's voice cracked like a whip. "Is that what they're calling it now? A convenient way to say forget your child, accept that she is dead and move on with your duties?" "I don't know her intentions," Knumet admitted. "But Mainet has been gaining influence in the temple for years. Some say she has the ear of the gods themselves." "The gods have been deaf to my prayers for 18 years, Nefertari said bitterly. "I doubt they've suddenly developed an interest in my grief." As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the garden, a young servant appeared at the entrance, bowing low. "Your Majesty, it is time to prepare for the ceremony," she announced. "The sacred oils and vestments have been prepared." Nefertari nodded dismissively, and the girl retreated. Knumet studied his sister's face, noting the fine lines around her eyes that had not been there the year before, the slight downward turn of her lips that had once smiled so readily. "Will you at least promise me one thing?" he asked as she made to leave. "If it will end this conversation, gladly. Try to keep your heart open tonight," he said earnestly. "Whatever Mainet's motives, whatever the priests intend, just be present, truly present." Nefertari regarded him with a mixture of irritation and reluctant affection. "You always did fancy yourself as some kind of mystic. Very well, brother. I shall keep my heart open, though I warn you there's precious little left inside it to stir." As she made her way back through the palace corridors toward her chambers, servants hurried about with last-minute preparations for the evening ceremony. The entire palace seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the very walls sensed that something momentous approached. In her chambers, a team of handmaidens awaited to transform their queen into a living embodiment of divine grace. Bathed in milk and honey, anointed with sacred oils, dressed in sheer linen so fine it seemed to capture the light itself, Nefertari submitted to their ministrations with practiced patience. As the final touches were applied, golden sandals, rings on every finger, and the magnificent headdress depicting the sacred vulture goddess Nekhbet, Nefertari caught sight of her reflection in a polished bronze mirror. The woman who gazed back at her was beautiful, powerful, ageless, and a stranger. "Is there anything else you require, Your Majesty?" asked the chief handmaiden, stepping back to admire her work. Nefertari stared at her reflection a moment longer, then reached for a small wooden box on her dressing table. Opening it, she removed a small pectoral made of gold and lapis, fashioned in the shape of a winged scarab pushing the sun across the sky. It had been crafted to be a twin of one she had commissioned 18 years ago, a sacred protective amulet meant to guard her newborn daughter throughout her life. "No," she said quietly, fastening the pectoral around her neck. "I am ready." As she emerged from her chambers, the full court awaited to escort her to the temple. Torches lined the way, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. Musicians played softly on harps and sistrums, while incense bearers wafted clouds of fragrant smoke that curled upward into the night sky. At the temple entrance, the high priest of Ra awaited, flanked by a dozen lesser priests and priestesses. Among them stood Menet, the high priestess whose reputation for mysterious powers had grown like a shadow across the kingdom. Tall and thin, with eyes darkened by heavy kohl that extended in elaborate patterns across her temples, she fixed Nefertari with a gaze that seemed to see through flesh and bone into the hidden chambers of the heart. "Great Queen," the high priest intoned, bowing deeply, "the god Ra awaits your devotion as the night sky awaits the return of the sun." Nefertari inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his greeting without warmth. As the procession moved into the vast hypostyle hall, with its towering columns carved to resemble papyrus stalks, she felt a familiar emptiness spreading within her chest. How many ceremonies had she attended over the years? How many prayers had she offered? How many sacrifices made? And still the void remained. The temple was filled to capacity. Nobles, priests, favored citizens, all gathered to witness the queen's participation in this special ceremony. Hundreds of oil lamps cast a golden glow over the painted walls, where images of gods and goddesses performed their eternal duties, frozen in time. As she took her place before the massive shrine of Ra, Nefertari allowed her gaze to sweep over the assembled crowd. Familiar faces for the most part, courtiers and officials who had served the royal household for years, but there were others too. Servants and attendants, standing discreetly in the shadows, tasked with keeping the lamps filled and the incense burning throughout the long night ahead. The ceremony began with the traditional hymns to Ra, praising his journey across the sky and his nightly battle against the forces of chaos. Priests moved in choreographed patterns, their voices rising and falling in practiced harmony. Nefertari performed her part with the precision that came from decades of royal training, but her mind drifted, as it so often did, to a tiny room where a cradle had once stood, to tiny fingers that had once curled trustingly around her own. "And now," the high priest announced, his voice echoing against the stone ceiling, "we come to the sacred embodiment of reunion, where that which was separated shall be joined again." Nefertari's attention snapped back to the present. This was not part of the traditional ceremony. She shot a questioning glance toward Knumet, who stood among the nobles, but he looked as surprised as she felt. At a signal from the high priest, the assembled crowd parted to create a pathway from the main entrance to the shrine. Through this human corridor walked Menet, leading a group of 7 young women, each dressed in simple white linen, their faces obscured by veils of sheer fabric. "What is the meaning of this?" Nefertari asked, her voice low but sharp. The high priest bowed again. "A special offering, Your Majesty. These 7 daughters of Egypt represent the 7 gates through which Ra must pass during his nightly journey. They will dance in his honor to ensure his safe return to the sky." Before Nefertari could question further, musicians struck up a hypnotic rhythm on drums and sistrums. The 7 veiled figures began to move, their dance telling the story of the sun's descent into the underworld and its triumphant rebirth at dawn. Despite her misgivings, Nefertari found herself drawn into the beauty of the performance. The dancers moved with remarkable grace, their bodies creating living hieroglyphs against the firelit backdrop of the temple walls. As the dance progressed, they removed their veils one by one, symbolizing the shedding of worldly concerns as the soul journeys toward divine truth. It was during this unveiling that Nefertari first noticed her. The 6th dancer was younger than the others, perhaps no more than 18 years old. Her movements carried a natural fluidity that set her apart, as if the music flowed through her rather than around her. As she removed her veil, Nefertari caught a glimpse of a face that sent a jolt through her body, like lightning striking a temple pylon. There was something in the girl's features, the high cheekbones, the slightly upturned nose, the set of her eyes, that struck a chord of recognition so deep it seemed to resonate in Nefertari's very bones. But it was not until the final movement of the dance, when the girl turned so that the lamplight caught her full profile, that Nefertari saw what hung around her neck. A golden pectoral, identical to the one she herself wore, a winged scarab, pushing the sun disk across the sky. The exact pendant she had commissioned for her newborn daughter 18 years ago. Nefertari's vision narrowed, the vast temple suddenly compressed to a single point of focus. The girl, the pendant, the impossible connection between them. She was vaguely aware of the music continuing, of the ceremony proceeding around her, but it all seemed distant, as if happening in another world entirely. The girl, what had the priest called her when introducing the dancers? Layla? Yes, Layla. continued her performance, unaware of the queen's intense scrutiny. As she moved through the final sequences of the dance, turning in a circle that brought her closer to the royal dais, their eyes met for the briefest of moments. Something passed between them, a spark, a question, a possibility so fragile it might shatter at the slightest touch. Then Layla looked away, resuming her role in the sacred performance, while Nefertari remained frozen on her throne, her heart pounding with such force she feared it might burst from her chest. "Your Majesty," the high priest's concerned voice barely registered. "Is something amiss?" Nefertari drew a breath so deep it seemed to fill the hollow spaces within her that had been empty for 18 years. With supreme effort, she composed her features into a mask of regal calm, though her hands trembled beneath the folds of her gown. "Continue," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. But her eyes never left the young dancer, watching every movement, every gesture, searching for further confirmation of what her heart already knew with unshakable certainty. As the ceremony drew to its conclusion and the assembled crowd began to disperse, Nefertari remained seated, as still as the statues that guarded the temple entrance. Court officials approached with matters requiring her attention, but she waved them away with uncharacteristic impatience. "Find out everything about her," she whispered to Knumet, who had made his way to her side, concern etched on his features. The dancer called Layla, where she came from, who raised her, how she came to serve in the temple, everything. "Nefertari," her brother began cautiously. "What is it? You look as though you've seen a spirit." The queen's fingers closed around the pectoral at her throat, its edges pressing into her palm with reassuring solidity. "Not a spirit," she replied, her voice barely audible. "A miracle." As the temple emptied, leaving only priests attending to their nightly duties, Nefertari's gaze remained fixed on the doorway through which the dancers had departed. In her mind, images flickered like flames, a newborn's cry, tiny hands reaching upward, a pendant glinting in the lamplight, and now, a young woman's face that carried echoes of her own. For the first time in 18 years, something stirred within the queen's heart, something that felt dangerously, impossibly like hope. Time seemed to stand still in the great temple of Ra. Though the ceremony had concluded, Queen Nefertari remained seated on her ceremonial throne, her body as rigid as the stone pillars that surrounded her. The incense hung heavy in the air, curling in lazy spirals toward the ceiling painted with stars. Only her eyes moved, tracking the slender figure of Layla as the young woman helped the other dancers gather their veils and prepare to leave. "Your Majesty," the high priest approached with cautious steps, his brow furrowed with concern. "The sacred rituals are complete. The royal litter awaits to return you to the palace." Nefertari barely heard him. Her entire being was focused on the golden pectoral that gleamed against Layla's throat, the twin to her own, a sacred talisman she had commissioned for a daughter who had vanished before she could even hold her properly in her arms. "That girl," Nefertari said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one called Layla. I wish to speak with her." The high priest hesitated, exchanging a glance with Priestess Menet, who hovered nearby like a shadow. "She is but a temple servant, Your Majesty, recently elevated to participate in the sacred dances, perhaps one of our more experienced priestesses." "No," the word fell like a stone. "I wish to speak with her, now." No one dared argue with that tone. The high priest bowed deeply and retreated, making his way across the vast chamber to where Layla stood with the other dancers. Nefertari watched as he spoke to the girl, noting how she startled, her hand flying instinctively to the pendant at her throat as she glanced toward the royal dais. Fear. That was fear in the girl's eyes, but why? What would cause a simple temple dancer to fear a summons from her queen? "This is unwise," murmured Knumet, who had remained at his sister's side throughout the ceremony. "If you believe what I think you believe—" "Not here!" Nefertari cut him off, though her eyes never left Layla, who was now making her way across the temple floor, her steps small and hesitant. Later, the young woman approached the dais and knelt, touching her forehead to the stone floor in the traditional gesture of obeisance. Up close, Nefertari could see that her hands were trembling slightly, and when she raised her head, her eyes remained fixed on the floor. "Look at me," Nefertari commanded softly. Slowly, as if fighting against some invisible weight, Layla lifted her gaze to meet the queen's. In the flickering light of hundreds of oil lamps, Nefertari studied the young face before her, the high cheekbones that mirrored her own, the slightly upturned nose that had belonged to Ramesses, the shape of the eyes that she saw every morning in her polished bronze mirror. "Your pendant," Nefertari said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It is unusual. May I see it?" Layla's hand went to the pectoral, her fingers closing around it protectively. It is all I have of my mother, Your Majesty." The words sent a jolt through Nefertari's body. "Your mother?" Layla nodded, her eyes dropping again. "I never knew her. I was raised by a woman named Tabia in the village of Deir el-Medina. She told me only that my mother had been forced to give me up, and that this pendant was left to protect me." A murmur ran through the remaining court officials who stood nearby, waiting to escort their queen back to the palace. Nefertari was aware of Mene watching the exchange with unnerving intensity, her coal-lined eyes narrowed to slits. "And this, Tabia," Nefertari pressed, struggling to keep her voice neutral. "She raised you as her own?" "Yes, Your Majesty. She was a wet nurse by profession. She said a stranger brought me to her in the night with payment enough to see me raised properly, and instructions never to speak of my origins." Layla's voice grew softer. "She died 3 years ago. That's when I came to serve in the temple." Nefertari's mind was racing, piecing together fragments of a puzzle 18 years in the making. A wet nurse, one who would know how to care for a newborn. A village far enough from the palace to avoid scrutiny, yet close enough to be reached in a single night. And the pendant, the unmistakable proof that connected this young woman to the royal household. "The pendant," Nefertari said again, touching her own that lay against her throat. "Would you show it to me?" With obvious reluctance, Layla lifted the pectoral away from her body, holding it out for the queen's inspection without removing it from her neck. Up close, there could be no doubt. The craftsmanship was identical, down to the tiny hieroglyphs engraved on the back, spelling out a protection spell known only to the royal family. Nefertari felt dizzy, as if the solid stone floor beneath her had suddenly turned to water. "How came you to serve in the temple?" she asked, fighting to maintain her composure before the watchful eyes of the court. "When my foster mother died, I had nowhere to go," Layla explained. "A priest from the temple had come to give her last rites, and he noticed my pendant. He said it marked me for service to the gods and offered me a place here." She hesitated, then added, "It was Priestess Menet who decided I should join the sacred dancers." At the mention of Menet's name, Nefertari's attention shifted briefly to the tall, severe woman who stood motionless across the chamber. Their eyes met, and Nefertari felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "You have done well in your service," Nefertari said, returning her gaze to Layla. "Your dancing honors the gods." The girl flushed with pleasure at the compliment, though uncertainty still shadowed her features. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "You may go," Nefertari said, aware that this was neither the time nor the place for the conversation her heart was screaming to have. "But I would have you attend me at the palace tomorrow. There are matters of the temple service I wish to discuss." Layla bowed again, clearly bewildered by the royal attention but too well trained to question it. "As you command, Great Queen." As the girl retreated across the vast temple floor, Nefertari felt as though part of her own heart was walking away. It took every ounce of her considerable self-control not to call Layla back, to declare the truth before all assembled, to reclaim what had been stolen from her 18 years ago. But wisdom born of years of court intrigue held her in check. If what she suspected was true, if Layla was indeed her lost daughter, then whoever had orchestrated the child's disappearance might still pose a threat. She needed to move cautiously to protect this newfound treasure until she could be certain of her safety. "The hour grows late, Your Majesty," prompted the chief steward, bowing. "The royal guard awaits your pleasure." Nefertari rose from her throne with the fluid grace that had become her hallmark, though her mind was a storm of questions and half-formed theories. As her entourage formed around her for the procession back to the palace, she was acutely aware of Mene's gaze following her, cold and calculating. "Knumet," she murmured to her brother as they exited the temple, "I would have you with me tonight. There is much to discuss." The journey back to the palace passed in a blur of torchlight and whispered courtesies. Once safely within her private chambers, with only Knumet and her most trusted handmaiden, Sati, in attendance, Nefertari finally allowed her composure to crack. "It's her," she said, her voice breaking as she sank onto a carved cedar chair. "Meritaten, my daughter." Knumet poured wine with his own hands, dismissing the servants with a gesture. "You cannot be certain based solely on a pendant, Nefertari. It could be a coincidence, a trick of the gods, a pendant commissioned by the royal goldsmith, Its design known only to the royal family? Nefertari's laugh was hollow. And did you not see her face? She has my cheekbones, Ramesses' nose, my father's brow. Blood speaks, brother. If it is true, Knumet said carefully, handing her the wine cup, then we must consider the implications very carefully. Someone took your child, a royal child, and hid her away for 18 years. That speaks of a plot far deeper than a simple kidnapping. Nefertari took a long drink of the wine, hardly tasting its rich flavor. And now, by what coincidence does she appear in the temple, dancing before me in a ceremony orchestrated by Manet? You suspect the priestess. I suspect everyone, Nefertari replied grimly. Manet was new to the temple when Meritaten disappeared, young, ambitious, hungry for power, but she would have needed help. Access to the palace, knowledge of the royal apartments. The investigation at the time cleared all the palace servants, Knumet reminded her. Perhaps it didn't dig deeply enough. Nefertari set down her wine cup with a decisive click. I want every record from that time examined again. Every servant, every guard, every priest or priestess who had access to the palace. And I want everything we can learn about this wet nurse, Tabia, and how a royal infant came to be in her care. Knumet nodded thoughtfully. It shall be done, but sister, what of the girl herself? What will you tell her? Nefertari turned to gaze out at the night sky, where stars glittered like diamonds scattered across black linen. The question pierced her to the core. How did one tell a young woman raised in humble circumstances that she was in fact a princess of Egypt? How could she explain the grief, the loss, the emptiness that had defined her mother's existence for 18 years? I do not know, she admitted softly. Not yet. First, I need to be absolutely certain, and I need to understand who was behind her abduction and whether they still pose a threat. And Ramesses? Knumet asked. Will you send word to the king at the northern frontier? Nefertari's hand went instinctively to her pendant, the match to the one Layla wore. Not until I am certain. He has grieved enough over the years. I will not raise his hopes until I know beyond doubt that our daughter lives. As the night deepened, Nefertari found sleep impossible. She paced her chambers, reliving the moment when her eyes had first fallen on Layla's pendant, the instant of recognition that had sent a lightning bolt through her very soul. Could the gods truly be so merciful to return to her what had been taken so cruelly? Across the city, in the austere quarters allocated to the temple dancers, Layla too lay awake, her mind replaying the strange encounter with the queen. Never in her 18 years had she imagined herself the object of royal attention. The intensity of Nefertari's gaze had unnerved her, those eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her, searching for something Layla couldn't identify. Absently, her fingers found the golden pectoral that hung around her neck, the one constant in a life filled with uncertainty. What had the queen seen in it that had caused such interest? And why did she feel both terrified and strangely drawn to the meeting that awaited her at the palace? As Layla finally drifted towards sleep, her dreams were filled with fragments of memory that seemed not quite her own. A lullaby sung in a voice she couldn't quite place, hands gentle against her skin, and a sense of belonging she had never known in waking life. Dawn broke over Thebes with the promise of scorching heat to come. Nefertari, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion just before sunrise, was awakened by Sati with news that Knumet awaited her in the garden pavilion with information he deemed too sensitive for the palace walls. Hastily dressed in a simple linen gown, her hair covered with a lightweight wig rather than the elaborate headdress of state, Nefertari hurried through the private corridors to the secluded garden where her brother paced impatiently. What have you learned? She demanded without preamble. Knumet's expression was grave as he handed her a small clay tablet. This was in the temple archives, a record of payment to a wet nurse named Tabia of Deir el-Medine, dated 16 days after Meritaten's disappearance. Nefertari's hands trembled as she read the hieratic script on the tablet. Authorized by, "This seal is damaged. Deliberately so, I believe," Knumet said grimly. "But look at the amount. Far more than would be paid for ordinary temple service. And the wet nurse, this Tabia? Dead, as the girl said. But I found a neighbor who remembered her, remembered when she suddenly appeared with an infant she claimed was entrusted to her by a relative. The timing matches exactly with Meritaten's disappearance." Nefertari closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself against the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "And the pendant? Did the neighbor recall it?" "Yes," Knumet confirmed. "She said the child always wore it from her earliest memory. Tabia claimed it would protect the girl from evil spirits. Or perhaps," Nefertari said softly. It was meant to identify her when the time was right. The siblings fell silent, contemplating the implications of what they had discovered. Finally, Khnummet spoke again. There's more. I made inquiries about Layla's arrival at the temple. It wasn't mere chance that brought her there after her foster mother's death. Menet specifically sent for her. Nefertari's eyes narrowed. Menet again. Always Menet. She has been rising through the temple hierarchy with unusual speed, Khnummet observed. Some say she has powerful allies among the nobles, perhaps even within the royal family itself. A chill ran down Nefertari's spine. You imply treason. I imply nothing, Khnummet replied carefully. I merely suggest that caution would be wise. If Layla is indeed Meritatan, then whoever orchestrated her abduction had a purpose. Whether that purpose still exists, and what it might mean now that you have recognized her. These are dangerous waters, sister. Before Nefertari could respond, a palace guard approached, bowing deeply. Your Majesty, the temple dancer Layla has arrived, as you commanded. Nefertari's heart leapt. Have her brought to the small audience chamber. I will attend her shortly. As the guard retreated, Khnummet caught his sister's arm. Be careful what you reveal, Nefertari. Until we know who is behind this, the girl herself could be in danger if her true identity becomes known. Nefertari nodded, though every instinct urged her to rush to Layla to embrace her as the daughter she had mourned for 18 years. I will speak with her alone, learn what she knows, what she remembers. And if she knows nothing? If she has been raised believing herself the orphaned child of unknown parents? Then I will proceed gently, Nefertari replied. But I must know the truth, Khnummet. I must know if she is my daughter. With that, she swept from the garden, her simple linen gown trailing behind her like a cloud. Servants scurried out of her path, sensing the unusual intensity that radiated from their queen. As she approached the small audience chamber, Nefertari paused, drawing a deep breath to compose herself. Inside, Layla stood in a pool of sunlight that streamed through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced around her like tiny stars. She wore a simple white dress, her hair bound with a ribbon rather than the elaborate styling of the temple dancers. Around her neck, the golden pectoral caught the light, seeming almost to glow with its own inner fire. Your Majesty. Layla knelt gracefully, touching her forehead to the floor. Rise, Nefertari said softly, dismissing the guards with a gesture. As the doors closed behind them, leaving queen and dancer alone in the sunlit chamber, the air seemed charged with unspoken questions. You wish to speak with me about the temple service? Layla prompted, when the silence had stretched uncomfortably long. Nefertari moved closer, her eyes never leaving the young woman's face. How had she not seen it immediately? Now, in the clear light of day, the resemblance was unmistakable, like looking at a reflection of her younger self, blended with Ramesses' stronger features. Your pendant, Nefertari said, her voice barely above a whisper. May I see it more closely? Confusion flickered across Layla's face, but she obediently lifted the pectoral from her chest, holding it out toward the queen. Instead of merely looking, however, Nefertari reached out, her fingers brushing Layla's as she turned the pendant over. There, on the back, just as she knew they would be, were the tiny hieroglyphs she herself had instructed the royal goldsmith to inscribe. Protected by Isis, beloved of Aten, daughter of the sun. Words meant to keep safe a princess who had been stolen away before she could even be properly presented to the court. Do you know what these symbols mean? Nefertari asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Layla shook her head. Tabia, my foster mother, said they were a special prayer to the gods, that if I was ever in danger, I should hold the pendant and recite my own prayers and I would be protected. And were you in danger? Layla's brow furrowed slightly. Not that I recall. My life was simple. Tabia was strict but kind. We had enough to eat, a roof over our heads, better than many in the village. She hesitated, then added, though sometimes when I was very young I remember her waking me in the night, bundling me up and hiding me in a storage jar when strangers came to the door. What kind of strangers? Nefertari asked sharply. I don't know. I was too small to see them. I just remember her fear and how she would hold me afterward, rocking back and forth and whispering that I must always keep the pendant close, that it would lead me home when the time was right. Layla's eyes widened slightly. I had forgotten that until just now. Nefertari's heart was pounding so loudly, she was certain Layla must hear it. Lead her home, when the time was right. Layla, she said softly, what do you know of your birth parents? The young woman's shoulders slumped slightly. "Nothing, Your Majesty. Tabia would say only that my mother was forced to give me up for my own protection. She would never speak of my father at all." "And you never questioned this? Never sought to learn more?" "Of course I did," Layla replied with a flash of spirit that reminded Nefertari painfully of herself at that age. "When I was 12, I ran away from home, determined to find the truth. I got as far as Luxor before Tabia found me and dragged me back, weeping and begging me never to do such a thing again. She said it would put us both in terrible danger. And after she died, when you came to the temple, did you not try again to discover your origins?" Layla looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly together. "I thought about it, but by then I had learned to accept my place in the world. What good would it do to know the truth? It wouldn't change who I am or what my life must be." "And who are you, Layla?" Nefertari asked, her voice gentle but insistent. "Who do you believe yourself to be?" The young woman looked up, confusion evident in her eyes. "I am Layla, orphan of Deir el-Medineh, servant to the Temple of Ra. That is all I have ever been." Nefertari's heart ached at the simple acceptance in those words, at how little this child of royal blood expected from life. Suddenly, she was filled with a rage so intense it threatened to consume her. Whoever had stolen this girl's birthright, whoever had condemned her to a life of servitude when she should have been raised as a princess, they would pay dearly for their crime. But first, she needed to be absolutely certain. There was one more sign she needed to see. "Layla," she said, keeping her tone conversational, "would you help me? The light by the window is better, and I've been meaning to sort through these papyrus scrolls all morning." Bewildered by the change of subject but eager to please, Layla followed the queen to where several scrolls lay on a table beneath the high windows. As she reached to pick one up, Nefertari moved swiftly, brushing aside the dark hair that fell over the girl's ear. And there it was, a small birthmark in the shape of a lotus blossom hidden behind her right ear, the same mark that had adorned every female member of Nefertari's family for 3 generations. The queen drew in a sharp breath, unable to disguise her reaction. Layla turned, startled by the sudden movement, and found herself captured in Nefertari's intense gaze. "Your Majesty?" she asked, confusion and the first stirrings of alarm evident in her voice. "Have I done something wrong?" Nefertari's vision blurred with unshed tears. How to answer that question? How to explain the tangled web of deception, loss, and what appeared to be deliberate conspiracy that had separated them for 18 years? "No," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "You have done nothing wrong, Layla. Nothing at all." But as their gazes locked, something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that went beyond words, beyond the rational mind. Layla's hand went instinctively to her pendant, her fingers closing around it as if drawing strength from its familiar contours. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it you want from me?" The question hung in the air, laden with implications neither woman was fully prepared to face. Before Nefertari could formulate a response, a commotion outside the doors drew their attention. Raised voices, the clatter of weaponry. The doors burst open to reveal Manet, flanked by temple guards. The priestess's face was a mask of outrage as she swept into the chamber, her dark robes billowing around her like storm clouds. "Your Majesty," she intoned, her voice carrying the practiced authority of the temple, "I must protest this interference with a consecrated servant of Ra. The girl was not given permission to leave the temple precinct." Nefertari drew herself up to her full height, every inch the royal personage. "I was not aware, Priestess Manet, that I required permission to summon anyone within my kingdom to my presence." Manet's eyes narrowed, darting between the queen and Layla, who stood frozen beside the window, clearly alarmed by the sudden confrontation. "The temple has its own laws, Your Majesty, as you well know. Those who have been dedicated to the service of the gods were first and foremost subjects of the crown," Nefertari cut in, her voice like ice. "Or do you presume to place the authority of a priestess above that of Egypt's queen?" It was a direct challenge, and everyone in the room knew it. The guards shifted uncomfortably, torn between their loyalty to the crown and their fear of divine retribution. Manet recovered quickly, offering a bow that managed to suggest deference while conveying defiance. "I would never presume such a thing, Great Queen. I seek only to protect the sacred order of the temple and those who serve within it." Her gaze shifted to Layla. "Come, girl, your duties await." Layla hesitated, looking to Nefertari with an unspoken question in her eyes. Something had begun to stir within her, a sense of connection she couldn't explain, a feeling that the answers she had stopped seeking might be closer than she'd ever imagined. And in that moment of hesitation, in that silently questioning gaze, Nefertari saw what she had been searching for, the first fragile thread of recognition stretching across the abyss of 18 years. "Layla remains here," Nefertari declared, her voice brooking no argument. "By royal command." Menet's face hardened, though she maintained the outward appearance of respect. "As you wish, Your Majesty. But I feel compelled to warn you, those who interfere with the chosen servants of Ra risk the god's displeasure." "I will bear that risk," Nefertari replied calmly. "Now leave us." For a moment, it seemed the priestess might object further, but something in Nefertari's expression, perhaps the barely contained fury of a mother who had glimpsed the architect of her child's abduction, made her reconsider. With another bow, more curt than the first, Menet retreated, the temple guards following in her wake. As the doors closed behind them, Layla let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "I belong to the temple now. If I fail in my duties—" "You belong to no one," Nefertari interrupted fiercely, "least of all the temple. But I don't understand. Why would the Queen of Egypt concern herself with a simple dancer? Why would you risk angering the priesthood for someone like me?" Nefertari moved closer, her heart pounding with the enormity of what she was about to reveal. "Because, Layla," she began, only to be interrupted by the arrival of Khunumet, who burst through the doors with uncharacteristic haste. "Sister," he said urgently, then checked himself at the sight of Layla. "Your Majesty, I must speak with you. Immediately." The gravity in his tone could not be ignored. With a glance at Layla that promised their conversation was far from over, Nefertari stepped to the far side of the chamber with her brother. "What is it?" she asked in a low voice. "The records from the temple," Khunumet murmured, his words meant for her ears alone. "I've found something. A scroll sealed with the royal emblem hidden beneath a false floor in Menet's private chamber." Nefertari's blood ran cold. "What did it contain?" "I haven't opened it," Khunumet admitted. "The seal is intact and it bears the mark of the royal house of Ramesses. But there's more. A letter from a priestess of Isis, dated 17 years ago, speaking of the child's safe concealment and warning of dangers within the palace walls." Nefertari glanced back at Layla, who stood by the window, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing apprehension. The morning light caught the golden pectoral at her throat, making it shine like a beacon. "Bring me the scroll," Nefertari commanded, "and post guards, loyal to the crown, not the temple, at every entrance to the palace. No one is to enter or leave without my express permission." Khunumet nodded, understanding the implications of her order. "And the girl?" "She stays with me," Nefertari said firmly. "She is never to be alone, not for a moment." As Khunumet departed to carry out her instructions, Nefertari returned to Layla, who had been watching their exchange with increasing worry. "Am I in trouble?" the young woman asked directly. "Have I offended the gods in some way?" "No, Layla," Nefertari replied, softening her tone. "But I believe you may be in danger, danger that has shadowed you since before you can remember. Because of this," Layla touched her pendant. "It's just a trinket, isn't it? A keepsake from a mother who didn't want me." The pain in those words struck Nefertari like a physical blow. "Is that what you believe? That your mother didn't want you?" Layla lifted her chin, a gesture so reminiscent of Nefertari herself that it was like looking into a mirror across time. "What else am I to believe? She gave me away, left me with nothing but this pendant and a life of uncertainty." "Perhaps," Nefertari suggested gently, "there is more to the story than you know. Perhaps your mother had no choice. Perhaps she has been searching for you all these years, her heart breaking anew with each day that passed without you." Layla's eyes widened, a flicker of something, hope, possibility, fear, passing across her features. "You know something," she said. "Not a question, but a realization. About me, about my mother." Nefertari held the young woman's gaze, seeing in it the same determination, the same thirst for truth that had driven her own life. "I believe I do," she said softly. "And soon, very soon, I hope to share that knowledge with you. But first, I need you to trust me, Layla. Can you do that?" The question hung between them, weighty with unspoken truths. Layla's hand went again to her pendant, her fingers tracing its familiar contours. Something was stirring within her. Memories long buried, feelings she couldn't name, a sense of standing on the threshold of a truth that would forever alter her understanding of herself. "I don't know why," she said finally, her voice barely audible, "but yes, I think I can trust you." As the words left her lips, a shaft of sunlight broke through the high windows, illuminating both women in its golden glow, the queen in her simple linen dress, the dancer in her humble temple garb, connected by a golden pendant and a bond that transcended the 18 years of separation. And in that moment, though neither spoke it aloud, both felt the first trembling beginnings of a recognition that went beyond reason, beyond evidence, beyond the logical mind. A recognition born of blood and bone, of heart and soul. A recognition that whispered of a truth both glorious and dangerous, a truth that had the power to heal 18 years of pain, or to unleash forces darker than either could imagine. The royal palace of Thebes had witnessed generations of dynasties rise and fall, and today its ancient walls contained a mystery unfolding, a puzzle of blood and birthright. Queen Nefertari moved through the palace with urgent purpose, servants and nobles pressing against walls as she passed, sensing the storm beneath her calm exterior. At her side walked Layla, the young temple dancer, her eyes wide at the opulence surrounding them. "Where are we going?" Layla asked, struggling to keep pace. "To find answers," Nefertari replied, her voice tight with emotion. Answers hidden for far too long. They descended a narrow staircase into the cool, dry air that carried the scent of papyrus and ancient dust. "The royal archives," Nefertari explained. "Every significant event in the royal household has been recorded here since my great-grandfather's time. If evidence exists, we'll find it here." Two guards snapped to attention, crossing their spears before an intricately carved door. "No one enters or leaves," Nefertari commanded. "And send word when my brother arrives with the scroll I requested." Inside, thousands of papyrus scrolls filled shelves from floor to ceiling, each carefully labeled and stored in cedar boxes. "How will you find anything here?" Layla whispered, awed by the sheer volume of history. A ghost of a smile touched Nefertari's lips. "I spent much of my youth in this room, much to my tutor's dismay." She moved confidently to a section near the back, where scrolls bearing the current dynasty's seal were stored. Her fingers traced the hieroglyphs until she found what she sought. "Here," she said, pulling out a scroll, "the record of royal births during your birth year." With reverent care, Nefertari unrolled the papyrus on a nearby table. Layla peered over her shoulder, trying to make sense of the elegant script. "Can you read it?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes," Nefertari replied, her finger tracing down the columns. "Here, the official record of Princess Meritaten's birth, daughter of Pharaoh Ramesses and Queen Nefertari, born under Isis's sign when the Nile began its annual flood." Layla's brow furrowed. The lost princess. Everyone knows that story, how she vanished from her cradle, and how the queen, her voice trailed off as realization dawned. "How you never stopped grieving for her." Nefertari met the young woman's gaze steadily. 18 years ago, my newborn daughter disappeared from the palace. No trace was ever found. No body, no ransom demand, just an empty cradle and a palace in uproar. Ramesses had the entire kingdom searched, but to no avail. She simply vanished. "Why are you telling me this?" Layla asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Instead of replying directly, Nefertari pulled another scroll from a nearby shelf. "This is the design for a pectoral commissioned for Princess Meritaten, a protective amulet meant to keep her safe throughout her life. Look familiar?" She unrolled the scroll, revealing a detailed drawing, a winged scarab pushing the sun across the sky, identical to the pendant around Layla's neck. "That doesn't prove anything," Layla protested, though her hand went instinctively to her throat. "It could be coincidence, or someone deliberately placed my daughter with a wet nurse in a village far enough from the palace to avoid detection," Nefertari finished. "Someone who made sure she kept the royal pendant that would one day identify her." Layla took a step back, her face pale in the lamplight. "You think but that's impossible. I'm nobody, just an orphan, a temple dancer. I can't be a princess." Nefertari's voice softened. "Is it really so impossible? You have my cheekbones, Ramesses' nose. You bear the lotus mark behind your ear that has been in my family for generations. You wear a pendant crafted by the royal goldsmith, bearing protection spells known only to the royal family." Layla sank onto a nearby stool, her mind reeling. "If what you say is true, if I am your daughter, then who took me, and why?" "That," said Nefertari grimly, "is the question that has haunted me for 18 years, and I believe we're finally close to an answer." A soft knock interrupted them. At Nefertari's command, a guard entered, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, Prince Khunumet has arrived with the item you requested and begs an immediate audience." Moments later, Khunumet strode in carrying a small wooden box inlaid with ivory and gold. His eyes flicked to Layla's stunned expression before returning to his sister. "You've told her?" he asked quietly. "Some of it," Nefertari replied. "But there's more to uncover. Is that the scroll?" Khunumet nodded, placing it carefully on the table. "Found exactly where my informant said, hidden beneath a false floor in Menet's private chamber. The seal is intact." "I don't understand," Layla said, her voice unsteady. "What does Priestess Menet have to do with this?" Nefertari and Khunumet exchanged a meaningful glance. Finally, the queen sighed. "Menet was new to the temple when my daughter disappeared. Young, ambitious, hungry for power. She's risen through the temple hierarchy with unusual speed. And now we discover a royal scroll hidden in her chambers and learn that she specifically sought you out after your foster mother's death. You suspect her of orchestrating my abduction." Layla could barely form the word. "I suspect her involvement," Nefertari corrected, "but not acting alone. The night you disappeared, there were guards at every door. Whoever took you had intimate knowledge of the palace and high enough status to move about without question." Khunumet cleared his throat. "My agents have been questioning temple servants. Several recall Menet receiving regular visits from a high-ranking noble, one who served on the royal council 18 years ago." "Who?" Nefertari demanded. "Amenemhat," Khunumet replied grimly. Nefertari's face hardened. "My uncle." "Your uncle?" Layla echoed, struggling to follow. "My father's half-brother," Nefertari explained coldly. "A man who believed himself more deserving of the throne, and who was disappointed when Ramesses chose me as his great royal wife instead of his own daughter." "But why take a baby?" Layla asked, bewildered. "What purpose would that serve?" "To break me," Nefertari said simply. "To weaken the royal line. Perhaps to replace you with his own grandchild when the time was right." Khunumet gestured to the sealed scroll. "Perhaps this will provide answers." With careful fingers, Nefertari broke the royal seal and unrolled the ancient papyrus. Her eyes widened as she scanned its contents. "What is it?" Khunumet asked urgently. "A letter," Nefertari replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "From my uncle to Priestess Mene, dated 3 days before Meritaten's birth. It speaks of a necessary action to secure Egypt's future and instructs her to have a wet nurse ready to receive the package." Layla felt the floor drop away beneath her feet. The package. "It's all here," Nefertari continued, her voice growing stronger with anger. "Plans for your abduction, instructions for your upbringing, even provisions for your eventual placement in the temple. This was no impulsive act. This was a conspiracy spanning decades, a plan to remove you from the royal line, only to reintroduce you when it suited their purposes." "But what purposes?" Khunumet pressed. "Amenemhat is long dead." "Perhaps this will explain," Nefertari said, extracting a second, smaller scroll. As she unrolled it, her breath caught audibly. "By all the gods, what is it?" Layla and Khunumet asked in unison. "A prophecy from the temple of Isis at Philae. It speaks of a princess born when the Nile floods early, marked with the lotus sign, who will either bring Egypt's greatest glory or its ultimate downfall." She read aloud. "The child of the great royal wife bearing the mark of the lotus shall stand at the crossroads of Egypt's destiny. If raised in truth and light, she shall unite the two lands as never before. But if darkness touches her heart, she shall be the instrument of Egypt's fall, tearing apart what the gods have joined." A heavy silence fell as the implications sank in. "They took me because of a prophecy?" Layla finally asked, disbelief evident. "People have done worse for less," Khunumet observed grimly, "especially those craving power. They couldn't kill you. The prophecy warns against the princess's blood being spilled," Nefertari added. "So they removed you from the palace, planning to raise you according to their designs." "And then what?" Layla demanded, anger cutting through her shock. "What was supposed to happen when I grew up?" Nefertari's eyes met her daughter's, for she no longer had any doubt. "According to this, you were to be prepared for your true purpose upon reaching your 18th year. Amenemhat's seal is at the bottom, alongside another I don't recognize." Khunumet examined the unfamiliar seal. "That belongs to the high priest of Set, the god of chaos." "Siptah," Nefertari breathed. He served until his death 10 years ago. So Amenemhat, Siptah and Menet conspired to abduct the princess, based on a prophecy, Khunumet summarized. But with 2 conspirators dead, what is Menet's endgame now? Perhaps this will tell us, Nefertari said, extracting a final papyrus. As she read it, her face drained of color. It's a ceremony to be performed on the princess's 18th birthday, which is 3 days from now, Layla supplied automatically. 3 days until they intended to use you in a ritual dedicated to Set, designed to redirect the flow of divine power and reshape the 2 lands according to the ancient ways. Human sacrifice? Khunumet asked bluntly. Something more insidious, a ritual to bind her ka, her spiritual essence, to whoever conducts the ceremony, creating a vessel through which they could claim divine authority. Layla felt ill. You're saying Priestess Menet planned to use me, to somehow claim the throne through me? Not just the throne, Nefertari said grimly. According to this, binding your ka would grant the wielder power beyond mortal limits. And a power to command not just the living, but nature itself. It's madness, Khunumet declared. No ritual can grant such power. Perhaps not, Nefertari conceded. But those seeking power often convince themselves of their own myths, and for 18 years they've prepared for this moment. Layla stood abruptly, hands clenched. All my life I've wondered who I was, where I came from, why I was abandoned. And now you tell me I was stolen as part of some deranged plot based on a prophecy, that everything I've believed about myself is a lie. Not everything, Nefertari said gently. Your courage, your kindness, your spirit, those are yours, regardless of your parents or the circumstances of your birth. She hesitated, then added softly, and you were never abandoned, Meritaten. You were taken, and I've searched for you every day since. The use of her birth name sent a shock through Layla's system. Meritaten, beloved of a 10, a name belonging to a princess, not a temple dancer. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered, tears welling. Am I Layla or Meritaten, a dancer or a princess? Everything is changing too fast. I know, Nefertari acknowledged, and I would give anything to have had the chance to ease this knowledge upon you gently, but time works against us. In 3 days, Menet intends to bind your ka to hers in a ritual that could destroy you and potentially unleash chaos upon Egypt. Khunumet, examining the ritual text, looked up sharply. These preparations have already begun. Look, when the dancer performs before the mother, the first seal shall be broken. The ceremony last night, Nefertari realized with horror. When Layla danced before me in the temple, that was the first step. And now you've taken her, Khunumet added grimly. Menet must know her plans are in jeopardy. As if summoned by his words, a commotion erupted outside, raised voices, weapons clattering. The door burst open to reveal the captain of the royal guard. Your Majesty, he announced, bowing hastily, the High Priestess Menet demands an audience. She claims the dancer Layla has profaned a sacred artifact and must be returned to face temple justice. What artifact? Nefertari demanded. The pectoral, Your Majesty. She claims it was stolen from Ra's inner sanctum and that its presence around the girl's neck is blasphemy punishable by death. Layla's hand flew to her throat. That's a lie! Tabia said it was left with me as a baby. I've never taken it off in 18 years. Of course it's a lie, Nefertari said, cold with fury. The pendant was crafted by the royal goldsmith on my orders for my daughter. Menet knows this, and knows that if Layla is recognized as Princess Meritaten, her plans collapse. She turned to the captain. Tell the priestess her accusation is rejected. The pendant belongs to the royal house, and Layla remains under my protection. Any attempt to remove her will be considered treason. The captain bowed, though concern flickered across his features. The temple guards are armed, Your Majesty, and Menet speaks of divine wrath. The common soldiers fear the gods' displeasure more than mortal punishment. Then we shall give them a greater fear, Nefertari declared. Summon the elite guards, those sworn directly to the royal person, and send word to the temple of Amun that I require the high priest immediately. As the captain hurried away, Nefertari turned back to Layla and Khunumet, her face set with determination. We have found the pieces of this ancestral puzzle, she said. Now we must use them before Menet can twist the truth. What will you do? Layla asked, still struggling to absorb the revelations. I will proclaim the truth, Nefertari replied simply. Before the court, before the priesthood, before all of Thebes if necessary. I will declare you my daughter, returned after 18 years. But we have no proof beyond the pendant and these documents, Knumet pointed out. Menet will claim they are forgeries. Then we need more than documents, Nefertari said, her eyes lighting with sudden inspiration. We need a witness, someone involved in the abduction who might speak the truth. Who? Layla asked. If the main conspirators are dead, there was another, Nefertari interrupted, turning back to the scrolls. These plans mention a nursemaid who assisted in the abduction, someone with access to the royal nursery. Neket, Knumet said suddenly. The nursemaid who disappeared the same night as the princess. Everyone assumed she'd been killed. But what if she helped orchestrate the abduction and then fled? Nefertari finished. And if she's still alive, she might reveal the truth, especially if she learns of Menet's dangerous ritual plans. But how will we find her after 18 years? Layla asked. We start with your foster mother, Tabaya, Nefertari replied. If Neket was involved in placing you with her, there might be some connection we can trace. I might know something, Layla said quietly. After Tabia died, I found a small box hidden beneath a loose stone in our house. Inside was a sealed letter. She always told me it was only to be opened in dire need. I brought it to the temple, hidden among my possessions. Hope flared in Nefertari's eyes. Where is it now? In my sleeping quarters, in the temple dormitory, Layla replied, hidden in a hollow in the bedpost. We must retrieve it, Nefertari declared. But with Menet watching the temple, I'll go, Knumet offered. I can enter under the pretext of a royal inspection. The priestess would not dare refuse a prince of Egypt access. As Knumet prepared to depart, Nefertari faced Layla once more. I must confront Menet, buy us time. Will you remain here where it's safe? Layla straightened her shoulders, determination entering her eyes. No. If I am who you believe, who I am beginning to believe I might be, then I will not hide while others fight my battles. I will stand with you and face Menet myself. Pride surged through Nefertari's heart at the young woman's courage. Stay close to me. Menet has waited 18 years for her triumph. She will not surrender easily. Together they made their way to the main courtyard where two opposing groups stood. Royal guards in gleaming armor bearing Ramesses' cartouche and temple guards in simple linen kilts marked with Ra's symbol. Between them stood Priestess Menet, her elaborately cold eyes fixed on Nefertari with barely concealed fury. Great Queen, she intoned with practiced authority. I come seeking justice for a sacrilege committed against Ra himself. Strange, Nefertari replied coolly. I see before me a greater sacrilege, a priestess abusing her sacred office to further a conspiracy spanning 18 years. Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Menet's eyes narrowed dangerously. I know not what you speak of, Your Majesty. I come only to reclaim a temple dancer who has profaned a sacred artifact. You speak of this, Layla interrupted, stepping forward to stand beside Nefertari, lifting the golden pectoral. The pendant I've worn since infancy. The pendant left to me by my mother, or so I was told. A lie, Menet hissed. That amulet was stolen from Ra's inner sanctum. Its very touch by uninitiated hands brings divine wrath upon us all. Another lie, Nefertari countered. This pectoral was crafted by the royal goldsmith on my orders, 18 years ago. It was meant to protect my newborn daughter, Princess Meritaten, who disappeared under mysterious circumstances that I believe you can explain quite thoroughly, Priestess. Shock rippled through the courtyard. Menet's face contorted with rage before she mastered herself, forcing her features into a mask of pious concern. Your Majesty's grief has clearly clouded your judgment, she said with false sympathy. This girl is no princess, merely a clever impostor who has preyed upon your maternal yearning. Is she? Nefertari countered. Then how do you explain this? She held up the recovered scrolls. Plans for my daughter's abduction, bearing the seals of my uncle Amenemhat and the former high priest of Set. Plans that specifically mention your role, Priestess Menet. Uncertainty flickered across Menet's face. Forgeries, she declared, though with less conviction. Planted to discredit Ra's temple. I seek only truth, Nefertari replied, and the truth is that you've been part of a conspiracy to remove my daughter from her rightful place, to raise her in ignorance of her heritage, all to fulfill a prophecy twisted to serve your ambitions. She stepped forward, her royal presence filling the courtyard. You plan to use her in a binding ritual 3 days from now, on her 18th birthday, a ritual that would have bound her car to yours, granting you power beyond mortal limits. Is that not so? Manet's composure cracked further, her eyes darting between the queen and Layla with barely concealed panic. These are fantasies, delusions born of a mother's desperate grief. Am I delusional as well, priestess? Layla asked, her voice stronger than she felt. Was my entire life a lie? Was I truly stolen from my cradle as an infant, raised by a foster mother who feared mysterious visitors in the night, brought to the temple at your specific request after her death? The courtyard fell silent, sensing they were witnessing a pivotal moment in Egypt's history. Manet's eyes hardened as she realized her plans were unraveling. Her voice lost its veneer of pious concern, revealing cold calculation. You understand nothing, she said, addressing Layla directly. The prophecy speaks clearly. The princess born with the lotus mark stands at the crossroads of Egypt's destiny. For 18 years, we have prepared you for your true purpose, to channel divine power in service of Egypt's return to the ancient ways. By binding her car to yours? Nefertari demanded. By using her as a vessel for your ambition? By fulfilling the will of the gods? Menet shot back, her facade crumbling. Egypt has strayed from the path of true power under your husband's rule. The old gods grow restless. The balance shifts. The princess was meant to restore that balance, to become the living embodiment of divine will. Your divine will, Layla said quietly, the horror of Menet's plans crystallizing. You never intended me to rule in my own right. You meant to rule through me, to use my royal blood to claim power for yourself. Menet's silence was answer enough. For a moment the courtyard was utterly still, as if all creation held its breath. The palace courtyard's silence shattered as the high priest of Amun entered with dignified purpose, flanked by temple officials bearing sacred standards. The elderly but commanding figure moved between the two opposing forces. Your Majesty, he said, bowing to Nefertari, I've examined the evidence, the scrolls, the prophecy, the ritual plans. Such practices are forbidden by both divine and mortal law. They pervert the natural order and threaten Ma'at itself. His stern gaze fell upon Menet. You have dishonored your office, priestess. You've twisted sacred teachings to serve profane ambition, using a royal child as a tool for advancement. The prophecy, Menet began, speaks of a princess who will bring either glory or downfall, the high priest finished, but nowhere does it call for binding her car to another's or demand the ritual you planned. He ordered the temple guards to return to their duties, explaining that the matter now fell under the judgment of the royal court and high council of priests. Left without allies, Menet's composed facade crumbled completely. Her cold eyes darted around the courtyard like a cornered animal seeking escape. You understand nothing, she hissed, her voice rising. The old gods demand the ancient ways. The two lands must be reunited under true divine authority. The princess is the key, the vessel through which the gods will speak. The only voice I hear, Nefertari said coldly, is ambition, masked as piety. Guards take her to the eastern tower until Pharaoh Ramesses returns to pass judgment. As royal guards moved to seize her, Menet's hand darted beneath her robes, emerging with a small alabaster vial. Before anyone could react, she hurled it to the ground at Layla's feet. The vial shattered, releasing a cloud of crimson powder that billowed upward, enveloping the young woman. What I began cannot be undone, Menet cried as guards restrained her. The first seal is broken, the second is cast. Her car stirs between worlds and none can stop what is to come. Layla coughed and staggered. Nefertari rushed forward, pulling her from the dissipating powder. Are you hurt? She demanded, searching the young woman's face. I don't think so, Layla replied, though her voice sounded distant. Just strange. Like I'm not quite here. The high priest examined her eyes, which had taken on an unusual gleam, pupils wider than natural. Heket powder, he murmured gravely. From the sacred lotus that grows in the underworld marshes. It thins the veil between mortal and divine realms, making the car susceptible to influence. Is it poison? Nefertari asked, fear clutching at her heart. Not to the body, the high priest replied, but to the spirit. It is a powerful tool in forbidden rituals, the very rituals described in those scrolls you discovered. As Menet was dragged away, still shouting prophecies of doom, Nefertari wrapped a protective arm around Layla's shoulders. What can be done? She asked. She must be purified immediately. The sacred baths of Isis would be best. The powder's effects will grow stronger until the ritual is either completed or countered with proper ceremonies. He hesitated, then added, she must be guarded carefully. In this state, her Ka is vulnerable to influences from both this world and the next. I'll take her there immediately, Nefertari declared. What about the letter hidden in my quarters? Layla asked, her voice carrying an odd resonance. It might contain proof to support our claims. Knumet has gone to retrieve it, Nefertari assured her. He'll meet us at the Temple of Isis. The captain of the guard approached with troubling news. Menet's supporters were gathering, spreading rumors that the queen had imprisoned a divine vessel and committed sacrilege against the gods. We need not just truth, but a truth so powerful it silences all doubt, Nefertari said. Captain, send riders to Deir el-Medine. Find anyone who knew Tabia the wet nurse, anyone who might have witnessed Layla's arrival as an infant. At the Temple of Isis, they were greeted by High Priestess Nebeta, whose serene face bore the marks of great age and wisdom. The Heket powder's influence is strong, she observed after examining Layla. We must begin immediately before the second seal takes hold completely. Second seal? Layla asked. The ritual Menet planned requires 3 seals to bind your K to hers, Nebeta explained. The first was broken when you danced before your mother. The second was cast when the powder touched your skin. The third would have been completed on your 18th birthday, binding your essence irrevocably to Menet's control. Can it be reversed? Nefertari asked anxiously. The first 2 seals, yes, with proper rituals, Nebeta assured her. But we must be thorough. She must be guarded until purification is complete. Layla experienced strange double vision, simultaneously walking through the physical temple and an ethereal version overlaid upon it. Shadowy figures moved at the edges of her awareness, voices whispered just beyond understanding. What's happening to me? She murmured, swaying slightly. Your K stirs between worlds, Nebeta explained. The Heket powder has opened doors that should remain closed until death. You're perceiving the boundary between mortal and divine realms, a dangerous place to linger. They arrived at a circular chamber where a pool of still water gleamed, its surface reflecting not the ceiling, but what appeared to be an unfamiliar night sky. The sacred pool, Nebeta explained, fed by a spring the goddess blessed in the time before time. Its waters cleanse not just the body, but the car itself. Prince Knumet arrived with troubling news. Layla's hidden letter was gone. Someone had reached it first. Worse, the city was in turmoil. Menet's supporters claimed Layla was indeed a divine vessel, and that the queen had interfered with the god's will by interrupting a sacred preparation. Lies with power, Knumet warned. The common people fear divine retribution above all else. But there was hope. The riders sent to Deir el-Medine had returned with an elderly woman, a former neighbor of Tabia's, who had been present the night Layla was brought to the village. She spoke of a hooded figure arriving in darkness, carrying an infant wrapped in royal linen with a golden pendant bearing the royal seal. The woman had also witnessed regular payments delivered by temple messengers throughout Layla's childhood, payments that increased whenever royal representatives came asking questions about missing infants. Hush money, Nefertari said grimly, to ensure her silence. The woman will testify before the royal court, Knumet added. And there's more. Pharaoh Ramesses has concluded his northern campaign early and rides for Thebes. He'll arrive by midday tomorrow. As Nefertari departed to prepare for her husband's arrival, Layla began the purification ritual, floating in the sacred pool as her mind journeyed through realms beyond mortal understanding. She witnessed memories, some her own, others seemingly from a life never lived. She saw herself as an infant in Nefertari's arms, witnessed her own abduction, and relived forgotten childhood moments when Tabia had hidden her from searches. But darker visions came too. Thebes in flames, herself wearing royal regalia with puppet-like eyes, speaking words that weren't her own, while Menet controlled her from the shadows. Fight it, Nebeta's voice guided her. These are not true visions, but manipulations, echoes of the binding ritual attempting to reassert control. Recognize them for what they are. As Layla pushed away the disturbing images, a commotion erupted from the temple entrance. Armed men bearing Ra's symbol burst into the sacred chamber, led by Nakht, one of Menet's senior priests. By order of the Divine Council of Ra, he proclaimed, the vessel must be returned to complete the prophecy. Egypt's future hangs in the balance. This is sacrilege, Nebeta cried, stepping protectively before Layla. You dare bring weapons into Isis's sacred precinct? As temple guards rushed to defend them, priestesses pulled Layla toward a concealed door behind the altar. You must escape, one whispered urgently. Return to the palace, warn the queen. The second phase remains incomplete. you're still vulnerable to their influence. Guided through hidden corridors, Layla emerged into the night through a small door concealed by papyrus. Behind her, flames began to lick at the temple roof as the conflict escalated. As she ran toward the distant palace, the golden pectoral bounced against her chest, the pendant that had marked her since infancy as more than the simple orphan she'd believed herself to be. Princess Meritaten, royal heir to one of history's greatest dynasties, but also Layla, raised by a humble wet nurse trained as a temple dancer, suddenly thrust into a conspiracy threatening not just her future, but Egypt's itself. Who was she, truly? The princess or the dancer? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. But one thing was becoming clear as she raced toward the torchlit palace walls. Whoever she was, she would no longer be a passive pawn in someone else's game. Layla raced through the darkness toward the palace, her bare feet muddy and bleeding. The incomplete purification left her mind clouded, visions of past and future flickering at the edges of her consciousness. Behind her, the temple of Isis burned, orange flames licking the night sky. Palace guards spotted her approaching and raised their spears until recognition dawned. "The Queen," Layla gasped. "I must see Queen Nefertari immediately." They escorted her through torchlit corridors to the royal chambers where Nefertari paced anxiously. When she saw Layla, disheveled, temple robes torn, eyes wild, she rushed forward. "What happened? Where is Nebeta?" "Menet's followers attacked the temple," Layla explained between ragged breaths. "They came for me, called me the vessel." The purification ritual wasn't completed. Nefertari's face hardened. "The audacity to attack a sacred temple. They believe they're saving Egypt," Layla said. "Nebeta said I remain vulnerable while the second seal isn't fully broken." Knumet entered, his expression grave. "Sister, Pharaoh's advance riders have arrived. Rameses will reach the city gates by dawn, and Menet has escaped." "How?" Nefertari demanded. "Loyal followers among the palace guards. The eastern tower is empty. 2 guards dead." Nefertari turned to Layla, determination in her eyes. "Then we must act now. Without the temple's protection, we need another way to break Menet's influence over you." She led Layla to her private chambers and opened an ornate chest. From it, she removed a small obsidian box inlaid with gold. "When you were born," Nefertari said softly, "I commissioned 2 items from the royal goldsmith. The pectoral you wear, and this." She opened the box to reveal a delicate circlet of gold, fashioned in the shape of a lotus blossom. "It was to be placed on your head during your naming ceremony. It carries the most powerful protection spells known to the royal house." As Nefertari placed the circlet on Layla's head, a warmth spread through the young woman's body. The double vision that had plagued her since the Heket powder incident began to recede. "Look," Nefertari whispered, turning Layla toward a polished bronze mirror. In the flickering lamplight, Layla saw herself transformed. The royal circlet seemed to belong on her brow, enhancing features she had never truly seen, features that unmistakably echoed Nefertari's own. But it was what lay behind her ear that made her gasp. The lotus birthmark, the sign that had marked Nefertari's family for generations, glowed with a soft blue light, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "The mark of truth," Nefertari said, tears filling her eyes. "Your royal blood recognizes its heritage. No deception can stand against this sign." As they stood together before the mirror, queen and daughter, separated for 18 years, yet linked by blood and destiny, the first rays of dawn broke over the eastern horizon. "Pharaoh approaches," Knumet announced from the doorway, and with him, the moment of truth for us all. The royal procession approached Thebes in a cloud of desert dust. At its head rode Pharaoh Rameses, victorious from his northern campaign, unaware of the storm brewing in his own palace. Messengers had been dispatched, but none had returned, intercepted by forces loyal to Menet. In the throne room, Nefertari prepared for confrontation. She had dressed Layla in royal garments befitting a princess, the golden circlet still adorning her brow, the lotus mark behind her ear still faintly glowing. "Remember," Nefertari instructed, "speak only truth. Your father has a gift for seeing through deception." "My father," Layla whispered, testing the strange concept. "The pharaoh is my father." Before Nefertari could respond, trumpets announced Ramesses' arrival. The great doors swung open, and the living god of Egypt strode in. Tall, powerful, his eyes immediately finding his queen. Behind him came an unexpected sight. priestess Mene, walking freely among his entourage. "My queen," Rameses began, but Menet stepped forward, prostrating herself dramatically. "Great Pharaoh, thank the gods you've returned. The queen has been bewitched by an impostor, claiming to be your lost daughter." Nefertari's voice cut like a knife. "The only bewitchment here is yours over truth itself." Rameses held up his hand for silence, his gaze shifting to Layla. For a long moment he studied her, his expression unreadable. "I encountered Priestess Menet at the city gates," he explained. "She tells a tale of temple sacrilege and royal madness. She claims this young woman is a common dancer, using trickery to prey upon a mother's grief." "She lies," Nefertari said simply. "This is Meritaten, our daughter, stolen from her cradle 18 years ago by conspirators, including Menet herself." The throne room fell silent. Rameses approached Layla slowly, his eyes searching. "If what the queen claims is true," he said softly, "there would be a mark behind her right ear," Nefertari finished, "the lotus mark of my bloodline." Layla turned her head, revealing the still glowing birthmark. Rameses' breath caught. He reached out, fingers hovering near but not touching, as if afraid she might disappear. "The mark could be painted," Mene hissed. "A clever forgery." "Then explain this," came Knumet's voice as he entered with the elderly witness from Der El Medine. "A witness to your conspiracy, and proof of royal blood that no mortal hand could falsify." The lotus mark pulsed brighter, as if responding to the gathering truth around it. Rameses looked from the mark to Layla's face, seeing at last what Nefertari had recognized, features that mirrored his own combined with his beloved queen's. "My daughter," he whispered, realization and wonder dawning in his eyes. "My child lives." The days that followed Layla's recognition as Princess Meritaten unfolded like a dream. Menet faced the judgment of both royal court and priestly council, her conspiracy exposed by the elderly witness's testimony and the recovered scrolls. The remaining temple followers who had attacked the temple of Isis were captured, their misguided loyalty to Menet unraveling as truth emerged. For Layla, each sunrise brought new adjustments. Handmaidens now attended her every need. Tutors arrived to teach royal protocols and court etiquette. The palace walls that had once seemed so distant now enclosed her daily life. Yet beneath the princess's new finery, questions of identity lingered. One evening, as the royal family dined privately, Layla, now officially addressed as Meritaten, found courage to voice her deepest uncertainty. "Who am I truly?" she asked, her fingers absently touching the golden pectoral she still wore. "For 18 years I was Layla, orphan and temple dancer. Now I am Meritaten, royal princess. Sometimes I feel torn between two lives." Nefertari reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "You are both, and that is your strength." Layla's compassion for common people, her understanding of life beyond palace walls, these are gifts no royal upbringing could provide. "Your mother speaks wisdom," Rameses added. "Egypt needs leaders who understand both palace and village. Your unique path has prepared you for greatness no ordinary princess could achieve." The next morning, Meritaten stood on the palace balcony overlooking Thebes. She wore royal garments, but kept her temple dancer's simplicity of movement. The golden pectoral lay against her throat, no longer a mystery but a bridge between her past and present. A delegation from the restored temple of Isis approached, led by High Priestess Nebeta. They carried a delicate crown fashioned as a rising sun disk, the Uraeus royal cobra at its center. "For the princess who walked two paths," Nebeta announced, presenting the crown, "may your dual nature bring Egypt the prophesied 1,000 years of prosperity." As Meritaten accepted the crown, the lotus birthmark behind her ear glowed briefly, not from magic or ritual, but from the recognition of a destiny finally embraced. She was Layla and Meritaten both, dancer and princess, commoner and royal, shaped by separation yet strengthened by reunion. In her unique duality lay not Egypt's downfall as Mene had planned, but its greatest hope for a future where palace and people understood each other at last. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson as Nefertari and Meritaten stood between the massive columns of the Temple of Hathor. The morning breeze carried the scent of lotus blossoms and fresh bread from the city below. After weeks of ceremonies, proclamations, and public appearances, this moment was theirs alone, mother and daughter finally finding space to breathe together, away from watchful eyes. "Does it feel real yet?" Nefertari asked softly, watching her daughter's profile against the rising sun. Meritaten smiled, an expression that still carried traces of Layla's quiet thoughtfulness. Some moments yes, others no. Yesterday, when the Nubian ambassador bowed before me, I nearly looked behind to see who he was addressing. Nefertari laughed, the sound echoing among the painted columns. I still remember my first royal audience after marrying your father. I was convinced everyone could see through my royal facade to the nervous girl beneath. How did you overcome it? I realized the royal garments, the titles, the ceremonies, they're just the outside. What makes a true queen is here. Nefertari touched her heart. The desire to serve Egypt, to uphold Ma'at, to be worthy of the trust placed in you. Meritaten nodded, her hand unconsciously reaching for the pectoral that had connected them across 18 years of separation. I want to be worthy of both my names, the princess I was born to be and the dancer who learned to see Egypt through ordinary eyes. It's that very duality that makes you unique, Nefertari said, her eyes filling with pride. No other royal child has ever known what it means to live as a common Egyptian. Your understanding of both worlds will make you a bridge between palace and people. They turned as footsteps approached, Ramesses joining them for the private family ceremony they had planned, away from court officials and public celebrations. "My stars," he greeted them, using the endearment reserved for his closest family. In his hands, he carried a small wooden box inlaid with ivory. "What is that, father?" Meritaten asked, still growing accustomed to calling this powerful man by such an intimate title. "A gift," Ramesses replied, "that should have been yours 18 years ago." He opened the box to reveal a delicate bracelet of gold and lapis lazuli, sized for an infant's wrist. "I commissioned it for your naming ceremony. It has waited all these years like us for your return." With gentle hands, he fastened it around her wrist, the tiny links magically expanding to fit her adult form, a feature the royal goldsmith had incorporated, knowing royal jewelry often passed through generations. "There's one more thing," Nefertari said, removing a papyrus scroll from her robe. "Each night after you were taken I wrote to you, letters you would never read, words to bridge the emptiness. 18 years of a mother's heart poured onto papyrus." Meritaten accepted the scroll, tears flowing freely now. "I used to create stories about you too," she confessed. "When I was young, I would tell Tabia tales about my real mother, a queen, I always insisted, though I don't know why, who would someday return for me. Some truths," Ramesses said gently, "are written in blood and bone beyond conscious knowing." Together, the reunited royal family faced the new day, not as pharaoh, queen and princess, but as father, mother and daughter, finding their way back to each other after 18 years of loss. Their embrace formed a circle unbroken, 3 hearts beating as one beneath the eternal Egyptian sky. As the sun's rays fully illuminated the temple, they released handfuls of blue lotus petals into the sacred pool, an offering of gratitude to the gods who had guided their paths back together. The petals formed a pattern like stars scattered across night waters, a constellation of their reunited family. In that moment of divine connection, the gods themselves seemed to pause and bear witness to a truth more powerful than any prophecy. A family's love, stronger than time, distance, or the most cunning conspiracy, had finally found its way home. I hope Queen Nefertari and Princess Meritaten's story touched your heart as deeply as it touched mine. Which moment moved you most? Was it Nefertari recognizing the pendant, the glowing birthmark, or Ramesses finally meeting his daughter? If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to turn on notifications for our next historical adventure. Our previous video about Cleopatra's secret diary had everyone in tears too. Remember, the greatest stories reflect our own capacity for hope and renewal. Like Queen Nefertari, sometimes faith against all evidence is exactly what we need. Until our next journey through time.